On today's World Insight, Hong Kong public's quick reaction to HKSAR national security legislation. An HK business executive spells out the significance of the law.
Ensure that there will be a certain degree of stability in our society.
The uphill struggle to stem the global coronavirus spread, with COVID-19 deaths topping 500,000. The World Public Health prognosis from top experts. And the World Health Organization on a mission to help stop the global coronavirus spread and other pandemic threats. How well has it done its job?
And so it's very difficult for the organization to then do a lot of the things that people are expecting it to.
Here is our host, Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Wei in Beijing. Chinese lawmakers have passed the draft of the national security law for Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. It is expected to take effect on Wednesday. Legislators agree that the law is well suited to the current situation in the city. They say it will effectively fix legal loopholes and protect the legitimate rights of the local residents. Critics fear the new law will erode the basic freedoms that they enjoy under the one country, two systems model. However, others disagree. Meanwhile, the United States looks to scrap Hong Kong's special trade status, barring defense exports and also restricting the city's access to high-tech products. President Donald Trump announced a withdrawal of Hong Kong's trade status last month, threatening a full range of export controls. Hong Kong's Chief Executive CARRIE has this to say.
We may
find alternatives to those products in many other countries around the world. The impact of the U.S. decision on Hong Kong will be very, very small. Any sanction will not scare us. We are prepared. When necessary, I believe the central government will also take countermeasures. We will do our best to cooperate on the countermeasures proposed by the central government at diplomatic level.
For more on U.S. cancellation of Hong Kong's specials, we are joined in Hong Kong by Edward Xie, Chairman and CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. Mr. Xie, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
State security law has been passed by the National People's Congress Central Committee. Now, what is your quick reaction to the latest development?
From the general public of Hong Kong standpoint, most people, I would say, would welcome this law because the law would ensure that there will be a certain degree of stability in our society. Because, as you know, in the last 1 year, Hong Kong have had a lot of turbulence.
Yes.
And that has affected all aspects of people's livelihood and also the overall economy of Hong Kong.
The Chinese central government is likely to establish security office in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, there's also likely to be other measures taking place as a result of the state security law. So what do you think are likely to be some of the latest events on the horizon in Hong Kong, and how will Hong Kong interact with those possible events?
What I think in the short term we're going to see is that there will be a drastic change in the street level events, i.e. protests and riots, that we've been seeing over the last year. I think there will be a significant drop in the occurrence of these kind of events. And at the surface of the Hong Kong society, much of it will return to a certain degree of normality.
We have been hearing reports suggesting some of the Pan Am campaigns and movements and organizations has dispersed. Your reaction?
On one hand, this is kind of expected, right? Because once the Pan Am factions is aware that they knew that their previous tactics could not work anymore. So, the disbursement or dispersion of, whoever they are from the organization standpoint is kind of expected. But I would also expect that because of the new law, they recognize that they have to change the tactics of how to fight against the, from their standpoint, the mainland Chinese government as well as the Hong Kong government. So I think this is a change in the tactics or strategy of the pandemics in response to the new law.
Likely there are new red lines set by the state security law. Now, do you think the general public in Hong Kong, which is has been quite used to a different kinds of lifestyle, will be able to adjust to the new situations?
For the majority of the Hong Kong population, I think they will find out. They will find out how the new Hong Kong life is going to look like under the new law. But my sense is that it's going to be a bit of a give and take as well. In other words, once the law is implemented, the Chinese side also is going to try to experiment things a little bit and see how the reaction from the Hong Kong people is going to be. And Hong Kong people will express their opinions, and there will be some kind of give and take along the way.
U.S. cancellation of Hong Kong's special status, particularly coming from the Commerce Secretary's statement. What do you make of that?
The U.S. or perhaps some of the other Western governments, most of them have never really studied the basic law. Most of them don't really understand how one country's two systems actually works. And whatever definition they have about, quote unquote, Hong Kong's autonomy is probably blurred and unclear. So it is under this context that I believe that any decisions, policy decisions that's made by any foreign governments, in the U.S. governments in particular, needs to be carefully reviewed. No sanctions is a good sanction, in my view. The world needs to work, the world will be a better world if people try to work closer together. But nonetheless, politics always get into the ways that people live, business run, and so on.
Right.
And I think this is yet another example of how that arbitrary insertions of one side point of view onto another side, in my view, is not optimal.
Many Chinese companies that are listed in the U.S. stock markets, as a result of the geopolitics, try to make another listing in Hong Kong. That's already been happening over the past few months. What does that mean to Hong Kong stock markets and also Hong Kong's position as a financial center in the Asia-Pacific region?
This is rather paradoxical because, in a way, the Chinese companies wanting to get a second listing in Hong Kong is somewhat of a response to how the U.S. government is treating the Chinese companies for right or for wrong. And when I said paradoxical, because it actually therefore enhances Hong Kong's capital market position, because these Chinese companies are flocking to Hong Kong, and also many new Chinese companies who have been emerging in the China market by themselves, and before they may consider going to the U.S. and get listed, and maybe some of them will continue to do so, but many of them will actually consider to come to Hong Kong to get the initial IPO. And so I think you will see this going on in the foreseeable future, and as I mentioned, therefore it's going to strengthen Hong Kong's position as a financial center. And in turn, we're going to create a larger pie for American companies who have been benefiting from this process along the way anyways.
That's a great point. Another thing, you have seen the Chinese central government and the financial authorities have been trying to create schemes with which cities, both on the mainland and in Hong Kong, Macau, will be able to more interacting with one another in the financial sector. For example, the most latest wealth management scheme that is likely to bring both residents in Hong Kong and in Macau, as well as those from 9 Chinese cities, to be able to buy financial products from each other's markets. So now that's interesting, isn't it?
I think this kind of measures are going to be beneficial both from the standpoint of the Hong Kong and Macau residents, but also mainland Chinese residents in the selected cities under the policy. And I also expect this policy will this sort of policies will increase in the numbers over time once Hong Kong's situation is stabilized. The mainland Chinese government will institute more of these kind of measures to encourage more mutual exchange of benefits across, the border between the SARs, the two SARs, and the mainland. And I think this synergy will accelerate the economic process across the mainland, Hong Kong, and Macau over time.
Final question for you, Mr. Xie. Of course, the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, has been talking about stop exporting, national security sensitive technologies to Hong Kong. How much impact will that have on Hong Kong, by the way, and also Hong Kong's trade interactions with the mainland?
It's unclear what Mr. Pompeo would do, but hopefully not, overly extravagant. But for now, I think, obviously this is a concern for us in Hong Kong. We want to see more details. It's probably going to impact some of us, but probably not in the majority of us.
You're watching World Insight, still to come on the program today. The uphill struggle to stem the global coronavirus spread, with COVID-19 deaths topping 500,000. The World Public Health prognosis, right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. A grim milestone in the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of infections worldwide has now reached 10 million, while the number of people who died from the disease is more than 500,000. The United States, Brazil, Russia are the hardest hit countries in terms of confirmed cases. Their infections combined amounting for almost half of the world's total. With still no cure or vaccines in sight, where is the global community headed, and how will it change our way of life for good? And in Beijing, we are joined by Professor YUANLI, the Dean of the School of Public Health at Peking Union Medical College. Professor Liu, welcome to the program. Always on the alert, is that going to be the new normal? What does that mean for all of us?
On one hand, we should not, relax our alertness. And I think one of the positive consequences of this COVID-19 pandemic is that much enhanced the public awareness of the infectious diseases, and also very good public health habits, such as washing hands and wearing masks in public places, and all those good habits should not be relaxed. But on the other hand, we also should gain some confidence as we know better and better how to deal with the disease, both in terms of rapid testing and diagnostics, as well as treatment and support.
Talking about the long term, some suggest coronavirus such as that coronavirus that has been leading to this outbreak is likely to be with us for a long time to come. So once again, what does that mean to all of us? Lifestyle change for sure, and probably for good?
Well, my prediction is anybody's guess. Nobody knows how long this COVID-19 will be with us. According to different simulation models, this pandemic or the epidemic waves of COVID-19 seem to migrate seasonally from northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere and back. And many scientists worry that in the coming fall, starting in September, this COVID-19 pandemic might coincide with seasonal influenza. And we don't know whether that interaction will happen, and whether the interaction of the two epidemics would have more serious consequences.
Right.
So, as we are fighting this new virus, we are also on the alert on the emerging new challenges of existing, infectious diseases such as seasonal flu, as well as novel infectious diseases.
Things are getting ever more complicated, a lot of unknown. Having said that, though, Professor Liu, I do want to ask you about some of the tools we have in mind. For example, vaccine. Now, we do not have any of the vaccine candidates in the world that has been confirmed through a trial 3, which could last for half a year or even a year time. But we do know now, over the past week, Chinese side, the Chinese military side, has announced there's something called Ad5 new coronavirus vaccine candidate that is jointly developed by CanSino and also the Beijing Institute of Biotechnology from Academy of Military Medical Sciences here in China. How much do you know about this, and what does that mean, 1-year trial in the military to the soldiers in China? What would that bring to us about the functionality and efficacy of this vaccine?
Well, it goes on with saying, without saying that many scientists, many laboratories, including the one you just mentioned in our military academy, but I have to mention that there are other Chinese labs alongside with other international scientists and laboratories have been working day and night, to trying to make headways with the R&D of vaccinations, which is the ultimate a weapon we can have to fight this new world war. However, on one hand, we are excited by the latest development on the China side with the vaccination trial going to the third and hopefully the final phase. And on the other hand, and also publicly, President Xi Jinping announced that we will make the proven efficacious immunization a global public good. And so I think in a world full of uncertainties and anxieties, this certainly infuses a certain sense of hope. But on the other hand, we should be very calm, and we should not let the inflated hope to overtake us, because we don't know, even proven effective in short term, we have no way to know whether you will gain a sustained immunity by injecting the vaccination, and we also don't know when the new vaccination hits the market, whether the mutation of the virus already is far enough to make the new vaccination ineffective. So there are still uncertainties.
Professor Liu, let's talk about the global situation. Which stage are we in now, even for the first round of this coronavirus, COVID-19?
The situation in the world right now doesn't give us, very clear sense of hope that this pandemic will end anytime soon. And we all know that the number of confirmed cases and the reported cases is just tip of the iceberg. So in the future, it sounds like we are not talking about a clear, to quote Churchill, this probably is not the beginning of the end or end of the beginning. It's probably a combination of many waves.
Finally, my question, Professor Liu, you already partly answered it already, but I still want a clear answer. Can China be this oasis, even though the COVID-19 number now in China confirmed extremely low? Will China be able to, on its own, in a way, survive well while the rest of the world is turbulent?
No. The short answer is no. And this is an interconnected world. No country, no matter how successful you have been so far, is not immune from imported cases or infections. And so we have to, the one world, and one fighting front.
Right.
And we have to be in this together, whether you like it or not,
Professor Liu YUANLI, the Dean of the School of Public Health at Peking Union Medical College. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you for your work. You're watching World Insight. With a global pandemic, all of us will live in a new normal. However, there's much more challenges than opportunities. Take a look at this chart compiled by the World Economic Forum. From prolonged world recession to restricted global travel and geopolitical exploitation of this crisis, you name it. And we'll have to fight against all of these together, as we are all in this together. For more discussion on the global battle against COVID-19, we are also joined from London, Linda Bold, Bruce and John Usher Professor of Public Health with the University of Edinburgh. Welcome to our program, Linda. Tell me more, Ms. Bold, about the UK's fight now against COVID-19.
So we've been one of the hardest hit countries in the world. Of course, more cases in Brazil, Russia and the US than we have. But in terms of all-cause mortality, the UK has done very badly. But we've had a very hard lockdown of over 10 weeks, and it's now gradually releasing. Our numbers are way down now. Yesterday, we just had several deaths, a very low number, and the number of cases in the UK overall was around 860. So that's a huge decline from recent weeks, but we still have a long way to go.
What do you think, Ms. Bold, that the UK has learned through this hard battle?
I mean, I think we learned a number of things. We were very badly prepared at the beginning. We didn't have the infrastructure that China, South Korea, or other Singapore, other jurisdictions had. We were very poor to get our testing up and running at a suitable level. We didn't have a well-developed contact tracing system. We've always had one, but it was very small. We also were not able to resource the teams, public health teams, that needed to respond. And then we also had to shift people out of our hospitals into nursing homes, where, of course, unfortunately, for our older people, had been badly hit by COVID. So there's so many mistakes that the UK has made. But now I think that our case numbers are so low, and we've learned about testing and contact tracing, and also simple things like wearing face coverings, that we are in a better position. But as we get into the later months of the year, in the influenza season, I think it's going to be very challenging for the UK to keep those numbers as low as possible.
Many believe that we are likely to live in this new normal for years to come. What is your thought? What is this new normal, and how is that related to infectious disease, particularly coronavirus and particularly COVID-19?
I think what people often forget is that we have over 10 million cases of tuberculosis every year globally, and we don't have a vaccine for tuberculosis, but we have effective treatments. So in terms of the months ahead, I think we'll be living with COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, the virus, well into next year. I don't think we're going to have a vaccine, if we ever have an effective one, until next year. But I'm hopeful for better treatments. So what we need to do, all countries, is keep the case numbers low, keep the physical distancing, the face coverings, keep our health services with additional capacity. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the UK just last night announced, have local lockdowns, very geographically targeted where there are more cases. And we've just applied one in Leicester, in the Midlands of England. Of course, Beijing recently had one, parts of Germany. But if we can keep that response local and not lock down the whole country, that's a much, much better and more sustainable way to do it.
If you look at what's happening around the world, in the United States, it is the largest economy in the world, and the world will not be able to open if the US could not do well. So, Ms. Bold, how pragmatic should we be about the US possibility?
Well, I think the problem in the US and indeed in the UK has been that governments have disinvested in the public health response for so many years, and also the US is a very complex country with many different states. They're not handling it well at all. I think my biggest concern now is not just the virus, it is, as you say, the economic impact of the US being badly hit and so many European and other economies. We're facing a huge recession. So what we need to do is two things. Three things. Continue with the public health response, do the science, but also recognize that we need governments to step up to provide income and security benefits to their populations so that people are not irretrievably harmed, their economic and mental well-being is not irreparably harmed by our response to COVID-19, and that's particularly important, finally, of course, for our young people, whose future depends on jobs and education.
Ms. Bold, herd immunity. Those were the terminologies actually very first shared by the British health community with the rest of the world. Of course, some of the opinions were being criticized. But now, when you look at that concept, how far away from there can we allow it to happen without a vaccine? With the U.S. 24 million likely already, according to their health authorities, of confirmed cases, how far are they from there? Will we see a scenario where the U.S. has achieved a herd immunity in a very sad way while the rest of the world would not? So how do you see those scenarios?
I mean, achieving herd immunity is very unpalatable because it involves many thousands of preventable deaths. Yes. And what we see from serology testing, so blood testing in Europe and indeed elsewhere, is that the level of immunity, from what we understand so far, is still quite low in countries like the UK. Only 5 to 7% of people have developed antibodies in response to the virus. So we are way off that concept. And countries like Sweden, who've embraced more of that, are suffering badly at the moment. So I don't think herd immunity is the solution. We'll only really get herd immunity with a vaccine. So protecting our populations through the measures we've just discussed is really the only viable way forward.
If you look at the mortality rate, it is mainly people with the age 75 and above. You know, for those from 20 to 40, it is only 0.5% of confirmed rate, but for 75 years older, it could be many times of that, likely to reaching almost 20%. So, Ms. Bold, this is Darwinism in a way, but in a civilized society, we have to do something, because the current generation that are in danger, those who are 75 years or older, have been contributing to our society and gave birth to all of us to begin with. They're our family members. So how should, do you think, from a health expert's perspective, balance these two things? One is reality, the other is the things that civil societies need to do.
Yes, I mean, in a perfect world, we would protect the elderly and those with underlying health conditions and keep them away from the rest of society because the risk of COVID-19 to younger people is so small, and that's been called shielding in the UK. But it's ethically and from a human rights perspective not sustainable. We can't cut off our older people from society. So we are dependent on the public health response to get the case numbers so low that it is safer for older people to be out in their communities again, to be seeing their families, and to not have the huge risk of getting the virus and developing COVID-19. So we have to strike a balance between meeting the needs of the young and also protecting the old, but allowing them to interact with society.
Do you think the UK has found a way so far, or in its search to find a way, is there some clues that you can share?
Yeah, so what I would say is we're catching up. We're catching up with other countries, particularly in South Asia, that have responded more rapidly and better than we have.
When we talk to some people, they've been telling us how much they wish life will be the same again. But when we talk to health experts like you, we hear that there's going to be a new normal, and that is going to be the normal. So how should we reconcile the wishes and the realities? Ms. Bold.
I think it's very difficult. I think that if you look at history, we've recovered from global conflicts or regional conflicts, and we have returned to normal life. And hopefully we will have more normality in the future. But in the short term, we won't. I think there are good things. We will be doing less traveling, more virtual meetings, more healthcare consultations over the internet rather than in person. All of these things are potential benefits for the environment and our way of life. But also we will suffer in that we won't have the same social interactions, and the economic harms will be very substantial. So we need to get used to living in a new way, and also recognizing that in future we may see other pandemics. And the key message for me is that all countries need to be prepared, not just for future waves of COVID-19, but also for when this type of thing happens again. So we avoid what I think has been a catastrophic global experience to date.
Linda Bull, the Bruce and John Usher Professor of Public Health from University of Edinburgh. Thank you so much. Be well yourself, okay?
Thank you very much.
You're watching World Insight, still to come on our program. The World Health Organization, on a mission to help stop the global coronavirus spread and other pandemic threats. How well has it done its job? Does the WHO deserve scrutiny? And what should be the relationship between WHO and its members? Some answers right after this break.
It served member states. It didn't have the authority to walk in and do what it liked.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines.
Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The World Health Organization under scrutiny amid a raging global health crisis. What did the WHO set out to do when it was created? How well has it met its missions already? For answers to those questions and more, I talked with Kelly Lee, a professor of public health at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Here are the facts about the WHO and public health under the global pandemic. Joining us in Burnaby now is Professor Kelly Lee, Professor of Public Health at the Simon Fraser University, who is co-founding the WHO Collaborating Center on Global Change and Health. Professor Lee, a pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you.
Tell me more, Professor Lee, about how WHO has played its role so far from your observation during the past half year since the outbreak happened.
The organization, as you may know, is the directing and coordinating body for international health work. So when a pandemic like this happens, this is when WHO swings into action. So I think it's done what it's been designed to do. It has two roles, really. One is to gather intelligence about epidemic outbreaks and disease events, which it has done. Countries will report to WHO about what is happening, provide the most information that they have. WHO then gathers that information and shares it with its member states. The second role it has is to alert member states if there is a particular concern that needs to be paid attention to, and the kinds of advice about what countries should do in case of these events. What is also, though, difficult is that this is happening at a time when I think there are a lot of tensions in the world, there's different geopolitical forces at play, and then what we've seen, as you described, an unprecedented pandemic, and it's had impacts on societies that we have not seen before. So whole economies shutting down, whole countries, shutting their borders and so on. So I think that's, difficult for WHO to navigate amidst all of this tension, all of this concern.
WHO is an organization that has been arguing that they are what they are as a result of the decision made by their member countries. What do you take about that argument?
Well, to some extent that is true. So when it was set up in 1948, it was set up as a member state organization, which means that it had limited powers. It served member states. It didn't have the authority to walk in and do what it liked. So it had very circumscribed authority. And so when you have a situation where some countries expect WHO to be more forceful, perhaps more, in terms of punitive in some of its measures, if you look back to how it was designed, it doesn't have those sorts of powers. The other thing that it doesn't have is a lot of resources. So member states fund WHO, and they've only funded given so much funding to the organization, and which means that the funding has to be spread quite thin. And so when you have an emergency situation where there needs to be much more resources, WHO is scrambling around, you know, almost like handing a hat around, trying to get emergency resources you know, to give to other countries. And so it's very difficult for the organization to then do a lot of the things that people are expecting it to.
So at this point, what is going to be the role and the division of labor between WHO and national governments and governments of regions in this regard?
Well, WHO has only particular functions. Now, in terms of on-the-ground action, it would then depend on what regional organizations might do, but particularly national governments. So where WHO is giving advice, where this advice is translated into action, that's where national governments come in. And so what happens is that we expect national governments to listen to WHO, take this advice, and act accordingly. And what we've seen is a real variation on whether that has actually happened. So some countries have been very quick to act and very effective, and others have sort of maybe took their time a little bit and really didn't take the measures that WHO was urging them countries to do. And so really, you know, WHO can only advise. It can't compel or it cannot force countries to act a certain way. I think that division of labor is where perhaps, you know, we need to look at, do we need an organization that maybe has more powers, has maybe more capacity to require countries to act a certain way.
There are things that are more related to facts, there are things that are less related to facts. So whether WHO has been wrong from the very beginning and has been continuing to do so until today, and therefore for the right reason being criticized by some, or it has been used mainly as a scapegoat for failure of certain governments and certain politicians.
I think we know where the accusations are coming from. It's coming from the Trump administration, and they're making accusations that perhaps you know, all the facts were not on the table as early as they could be. So there was some sort of outbreak. Somebody hid the facts. We don't think they're right, but you know, we don't know fully, so we have to be open about it. We have to allow an investigation, and then, you know, who knew what when and who said what when. All of these things are going to take time. I agree that this is not the time to look at those questions, and the real important dates are after January 30th, when every country got the same information, and WHO declared an emergency. So there's no disputing that fact. And every country had the opportunity to act at that point. Some did and some didn't. And I think that's where I think we have to see why some countries have done so well in controlling this pandemic and others have done so poorly. And, you know, there is certainly undoubtedly some scapegoating going on. There's an election coming up in the US. You know, there's no coincidence that this kind of rhetoric is being ramped up as we get closer to the election.
Another related question is about the funding of WHO. Now, we know that Washington, under this administration, has decided to undercut its funding, which has been there for decades for WHO. What does it mean when an international health organization at the peak time it should function being undercut of its budget?
Yeah, the timing could not be worse. I liken it to, you know, you're trying to fight a big fire and somebody turns the hose, you know, the water off in your hose. It's really an unfortunate and disappointing decision. So we need all hands on deck. You know, this is the saying, we need all hands on deck. And this is not the way to act in the middle of the pandemic. So it will hurt WHO. If anything, you know, the resources should be increased. And what we're seeing is, you know, maybe a shift to thinking about how we could fund global health security properly. We've underfunded it. We've hollowed it out. It's been a kind of, you know, 3 decades of underfunding of public services, and public health is one of those areas that always gets cut. It's kind of expendable in terms of, you know, the shrinking state as we describe it. And so what we're seeing now is the impact of that. We see countries that have very weak public health systems, very weak health systems, clinical care. And those who can afford it get access. Those who don't, they are getting sick, and they are not getting access to the kind of treatment they need. Mm-hmm. And of course, in a pandemic, we need to help everybody. This is a public health issue, right, which means we're as healthy as our neighbor. We are as healthy as the most vulnerable in our societies. So if we don't help everyone, we actually, hurt ourselves.
Another thing is whether reasonable voices will be silenced as a result of political correctness. We have been seeing the politicization of issues related to WHO and its role by governments. And therefore, many of those who are critical voices have been silenced with the fear that they might make statements that would not be considered as politically correct in one side or the other side. What does that mean now? If these voices are being silenced at a time when we need to hear them the most?
Yes, and in a public health emergency, what you want is your public health leaders to come forward and to lead, and not to have political leaders necessarily interfering. What you want is the political leaders to support the public health leaders, to work together as a team. So we've seen that in some countries where, the public health and the political leaders come together and they give the same messages, the same communication to the public. But in some countries, and I have to say the US is an example, is where you see a lot of fractious arguing between public health people, the experts, the people who know about these things, and the political leaders who think they know more. And so you have a division across society. People become very confused. They become very doubtful that, what advice should I think? Should I follow? Should I really socially isolate? And then you get a breakdown of the kind of cooperation that you need from the public to deal effectively with an outbreak. This is an example, I think, of bad politics in global health.
Professor Kelly Lee, a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's great to talk to you.
The debate about WHO and its relations with its members. That's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight, or you can check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook accounts. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching.